So the last group is the nucleic acids. We talked about carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and then our last group is nucleic acids. DNA and RNA are good examples of nucleic acids. They are made of building blocks just like everything else. Carbohydrates, remember, it was monosaccharides. Proteins were amino acids. So nucleic acids are made of what are called nucleotides. And a nucleotide consists of three parts: of a sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogen base. This is the one macromolecule where you definitely see the phosphate group. So that is something that is unique. Although I should take that back. Phospholipids also had a phosphate group. But in general, carbohydrates and lipids were just made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. In carbohydrates, it was C6H12O6 or C5H10O5. The monosaccharides had that CnH2nOn. That was a carb or a monosaccharide. Lipids were long chains of fatty acid chains, which were mostly carbon and hydrogen. Proteins and nucleic acids both have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Proteins had the nitrogen in the amino group of amino acids, and we see it in the nucleic acids in the nitrogen base. So here's the nitrogen base on a nucleic acid, on a nucleotide. Here, the 5-carbon sugar, or the pentose sugar. I can actually show it to you on all of these. And that is usually ribose or deoxyribose, because those are DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA, ribonucleic acid. And then the last part is the phosphate group, as I mentioned, and the phosphate group is here. And again, they're the actually phosphate group, other than phospholipids having a phosphate group. It's something that is very specific and unique to the nucleic acids. They have phosphate groups. So here's a phosphate group on this one, and this is actually ATP. It actually has 3 phosphate groups. But that's something, if you see phosphate, most of the time it's nucleic acids that they're talking about. The only other one, like I said, would be phospholipids. We are going to talk about nucleic acids a lot more later on, but I did want you to know that there is a very important relationship between nucleic acids and proteins. Nucleic acids are the directions or instructions for making a protein. They basically tell the cell what proteins to make. That's sort of their entire job, is to tell the cell what proteins to make. So if the DNA is messed up, it would give faulty instructions, and the protein that would be made would be wrong. And that would be extremely important. So your heredity really is your genes coding for all the proteins in your body, your hair, your skin, your enzymes, your hormones, all of those things that are made of protein. The DNA is the code to make them. And here's an example. If your DNA has a particular error, which results in what's called sickle cell anemia, there's a mistake in the DNA that codes for making the protein in hemoglobin. This is what a normal red blood cell looks like. It's round, carries oxygen because of the hemoglobin. In the sickle cell anemia mutation, the DNA has the wrong instructions. And those instructions, there's a protein that's made, the hemoglobin protein, and it's something like 250 amino acids long. Just one of those amino acids is wrong. It has the wrong R group. And they show the example here. It has valine instead of glutamic acid. That's not really important. The bottom line is, by changing that one amino acid, because of the DNA instruction being incorrect, the cell folds up wrong. And this is what a sickle cell looks like. It doesn't carry oxygen well. It can actually clog up the blood vessels. And so the relationship between DNA and protein is very, very important. The nucleic acids are those instructions. If the instructions are wrong, the protein will be wrong. So just wanted to clarify that. And in a summary, just to show you really quick, so carbohydrates were made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The building blocks were monosaccharides, and monosaccharides had a formula of CnH2nOn. Polysaccharides, like starch and cellulose, their formula was not exactly that, and I showed you how to calculate their formula by if they were made in a chain. Lipids included triglycerides, which were made of fatty acids as their building block. It also included steroids, and they were long chains of carbon and hydrogen, making them insoluble in water. Phospholipids were the only ones that contained something extra, and your cell membranes are made of phospholipids. They actually did have a phosphate group. But other than phospholipids, carbohydrates and lipids were mainly just made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Proteins were made of amino acids. They had carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and they were the ones that had an amino group on their amino acids, and so nitrogen would be very important there. Another one that's important there is sulfur, because this is where you'll see the sulfhydryl group, which is important in tertiary structures. And finally, nucleic acids, which also are composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus because of the phosphate group. So that's kind of a summary of sort of what elements you would find in each of the groups. Hopefully that kind of helps.